Hello and welcome to Ways to Change the World. I'm Christian Guru-Murthy, and this is the podcast in which we talk to remarkable people about the big ideas in their lives, what they really believe in, where they come from, and the events that have helped shape what they think. And my guest today is right in the middle of the news. Chuka Umunna resigned yesterday at time of recording as a Labour MP. He is the former Labour MP for Streatham, now an independent, former Shadow Business Secretary, former Labour leadership contender at one time. And I just wonder how you're feeling today. Are you feeling like you've sort of jumped off a cliff, or are you feeling exhilarated?
I think when we collectively resigned yesterday, there was a mixture of emotions, a huge sense of sadness, but also a sense of relief that we had left and were therefore liberated to pursue a different avenue. And so there was no jubilation in this at all. And I think people saw from the event that it was very personal. The journey that we've been on has been shaped by who we are, where we're from, and our values. And we each had our own story to tell. And as a collection of individuals, we're all quite different. We're from different generations. We represent different parts of the country. And so it's a strange feeling, but a sense of a new beginning and a mission to create something different.
How desperately do you want to change the world?
You shouldn't go into politics unless you have a burning desire to change the world. And, I've just come to this recording from a youth club in my constituency. We had a visit from some royalty. And, I look at my own constituency that I grew up in, and we're a wonderful community, dynamic, enterprising, young, full of energy, very diverse both socioeconomically and ethnically. But God, we have our challenges. 1 in 4 people living in absolute poverty. We're one of the authorities with the highest deprivation indices in England. So we've got our problems. And I'm not the kind of person to just sit around and be a bystander in that. And the problem really for us in the Labour Party is we were spending an inordinate amount of time on, frankly, a civil war that's been raging in that party for 3 years. And you don't join a party to fight other people in that party. As you intimate, you join a party and you get involved in politics because we've got to change the world. And that's ultimately why we did what we did. I don't want to have to think about all the factional stuff in the Labour Party and whatever. I'd rather actually focus on the big issues.
Do you feel, having done what you've done, that you are in a better place to change the world? Or is this really about stopping Jeremy Corbyn's change the world the way he wants to change it? Which is very different to the way you want to change it.
I see it in much broader terms. We have a 20th century political model dominated by 2 parties, but also there's a third party too, which is not working in the 21st century. The system is broken, huge divisions, chaos, a lack of basic competence, and a party system that's not reflecting the diversity that the modern tapestry, which is Britain, is not reflected in it. And partly maybe it's through the advent of technology, but also the changing demography of our country. You can't accommodate that with the current model. You've got to create something different, in my view. And it worked before in the 20th century because essentially we had a class-based politics and these parties were, fairly stable coalitions of interests. And that's just fractured. And we aren't just defined and diversified on the basis of class lines anymore. If you look at the Brexit vote, for example, what was driving how people voted? Age was a big determinant, the level of your qualifications, where you lived in the country, whether you have an immigrant background or not, all these other cultural issues are playing and are much more relevant. So I'm not saying the kind of class politics and left-right is no longer relevant at all. It's just nowhere near as relevant in modern Britain in the 21st century as it was in the 20th, but we're saddled with this system which is operating like we're in the past. And so I actually think we need to create something different now.
I want to talk to you about that in detail, but I want to sort of work out where you are in all of this, because, one of the products of being a politician is that you are inevitably defined by the people who write about you and talk about you in a mediated world. And you have variously been, the great hope, the Britain's Barack Obama, the next Labour leader, the youngest, great hope, and then, the evil one, the traitor, the Blairite, the spiv, the middle-class phony. Do you feel you've always been misunderstood?
I think in British politics, people like to pigeonhole you. And I come from quite a diverse background in different ways. My father was a working class black man who came to this country in 1964 from Nigeria with no money and worked his way up to being a successful entrepreneur. And he was probably one of the few black members of the Institute of Directors in the 80s who was a massive Labour supporter. But then on my mother's side, my mother was a probation officer, quite middle class background. My grandfather was a prosecutor at the Nuremberg trials, but Irish. But went on to become a British High Court judge. So put it this way, I won't be pigeonholed because of the diversity of my cultural heritage, but Westminster isn't somewhere that allows for that. And I certainly found, like, culturally in the Labour Party, people do like to pigeonhole you. There is a bit this attitude that if you arrive in the House of Commons, particularly if you're young, you're diverse, you serve your time. And then later, you might be able to do something and make an argument and, go on to, be part of a national campaign and make an argument. And that was never my style. And maybe I pissed people off because of that. And I got promoted very quickly and people, resent that. There's lots of jealousy. So I've always said that I've always described myself as a centre-left social democrat. And I felt sometimes during our time in government, if we want to use the old traditional, definitions, moved a bit to, well, put it this way, we didn't challenge the economic consensus enough that had been bequeathed by Margaret Thatcher. And then what I think has happened with the Labour Party has actually gone very much to the left. But like I said, this left-right thing is just not as relevant. But I'm talking about a different era there.
I'm also talking about race, though. I mean, how defined by race are you? Go to your website. The first thing you say is, I am the son of a Nigerian and an English-Irish mother. How important is your race in defining your politics and who you are, and has it been?
I'm a politician who's of a diverse background, but I am not like I think a predecessor in the House of Commons said, I am a politician who happens to be black, but not a black politician. So it's a massive part of my identity. But I've politically never necessarily defined myself in that way. And one of the things that I've always found, certainly in the African community and the different black communities, when I first entered Parliament and I initially came to some prominence, I suppose, on the Treasury Select Committee during the aftermath of the banking crisis and all the scrutiny we were doing there, and then Shadow Business Secretary, I found that a lot of my constituents of colour loved the fact that I wasn't talking about what was seen as black issues, but that I was majoring on an economic brief, and that's what I was known for. But look, it's part of your identity. I'm proud of it.
Did you veer away from it? I mean, I talked to David Lammy on this podcast, and he said he was advised early on by sort of people in the Blair regime. Don't be too black. Don't get hung up on being a black politician. Well, I know. Is that how you were advised?
No. And I just, to be honest, I always had an interest in economic and business issues. I was, I'd come from the private sector. I hadn't been a special advisor, a counsellor, or worked full-time in politics before I was elected. I was an employment lawyer for the best part of 10 years, and I worked for employees and employers, entrepreneurs, large businesses. So that was my background. And so it was natural that when I got into Parliament, in a way, I was going to major on economic and business issues because it's kind of what I knew, and I had some, I had some experience to bring to the table. And certainly, in the aftermath of the banking crisis, when, for example, on the Treasury Select Committee, we were looking at the huge remuneration packages that these bankers kept on getting, having caused the global financial crash. I actually understood the construction of those packages because I used to draft service agreements for bankers, and so I was in a position. Now, I actually thought, funnily enough, that was going to work against me in the Labour Party. And I certainly played down that experience when I was going for selection as a candidate because, it was not necessarily an attractive proposition. But I actually thought, I've got knowledge. I know how these contracts work. And therefore, I understand the kind of reforms that we need to make.
I mean, culturally, what was growing up like? I mean, because I presume you didn't have your dad's family around in Britain. So were you essentially brought up by white family and your dad?
Well, Lambeth is an incredibly diverse borough. And, we're 45% of a black and minority ethnic background in the community in Lambeth, and so I was surrounded by that culture. And actually, I mean, it's always very nice. My father passed away when I was 13. He was killed in a car crash. But shortly before he passed away, he stood for the governorship of his state in Nigeria, Anambra State. And there are lots of people from the tribe that my family are part of in Nigeria, the Igbo tribe and the state, who often, like, are the odd minicab driver or academic sometimes that I'd bump into, go, oh, I know your dad was, Ben Umunna, wasn't he? And I'd be like, yeah. So I was surrounded. There's lots of that culture around, and in both my primary and secondary schools, it was very diverse. But unfortunately, no. The overwhelming majority of my family are on my father's side are in Nigeria. But the thing is that I'm very grateful to my parents for, I suppose, is that my sister and I never felt this need to choose between our identities. So it wasn't that we were black or white. It was you're black and you have a European heritage. And I remember when Tiger Woods got himself in a bit of hot water with some of the black media when he said, I am not black. Now, he's of mixed race like me, but he said, I am not black. And I know how the interview would have gone and how he would have been pinned down. Do you associate with one or the other? And whereas actually it's all of those things. And that's why actually I did find it a challenge in the Labour Party, and I found it a challenge when initially I arrived in Westminster because people wanted to get you, pigeonhole you.
Do you think people wanted you to be blacker than you were?
I don't know. Frankly, I don't care. Well, I hope sounding arrogant, but I am who I am, and I'm not going to have anybody tell me who I am and what parts of my background I should identify with. That's a decision for me, and I'm certainly not going to have people force me to choose between the different elements of my heritage of which I'm so proud.
Have you felt that?
Have I felt that
the people wanted you to be
sometimes?
blacker?
Well, not so much. Not really. To be honest, on the racial dimension, I think I am a middle class mixed race guy. And that isn't necessarily a stereotype that certainly in the Labour Party people are used to. And when I really realised how much my race probably was an issue was when I briefly stood for the leadership in the Labour Party, and the small nascent team of organisers we had in the Parliamentary Labour Party speaking to colleagues, and there were colleagues who said, my white working class constituents won't vote for him. And I just can't therefore support him, which was quite shocking, actually. And I didn't make a big thing of it at the time, but it did slightly surprise me because I thought we'd moved on from that, certainly in what was supposed to be a progressive party.
Did that contribute to you pulling out?
No, I pulled out.
Did you think maybe Britain wasn't ready for a black leader?
No, it didn't. That didn't contribute at all. It was to be honest, it was a very kind of human decision. It was a perfect clash between my private and my personal life and my work life. And I knew that I was going to come under a huge amount of scrutiny and attention, but I didn't really foresee that my family would do, and in particular, my then girlfriend and now my wife. And when the first conversation you're having with your prospective father-in-law is to apologise for a bunch of media turning up on their doorstep, there's a problem. That's all fine now, But I think one of the problems with being a member of Parliament actually is, on the one hand, you've got to have your feet firmly on the ground and understand everyday life and lead an everyday life to understand it. But it's very, very difficult to do that because of the pressures on your time and the demand.
Is it possible at all?
Well, arguably it's impossible. And I'd felt up to that point that, I'd just been on this crazy trajectory where I got selected against the odds to be the Labour candidate in Streatham. I then got elected, and in a very tough election where the seat had become marginal. And then very quickly I was on the Treasury Committee, and then I was the Shadow Business Secretary within a year of a run. So I just went like that. And my life had become politics. And it had never been like that before. And I just felt that I didn't want to be that person. And at the time that all the leadership stuff came up, I suddenly had got some balance back in my life. And I felt, I don't want to change that. And there are things more important than being an MP and politics. And if you're not happy, then you can't really be an effective politician. And so I didn't feel I'd be being true to myself. So it was about, and there was all this speculation, about, potential drug taking, my sexuality. I heard here in ITN, there was a story going on around, one of his, family members is part of Boko Haram in Nigeria. The amount
I
of stuff.
I heard that one. But...
Yeah, no, I got a call. I got a friend of mine who kind of works in here said, "Oh, you never believe what somebody just asked me. It's literally going around." And but it's the nature of this job.
What did you think? Well, you must have known. Everyone's saying, "Oh, he's gay. He's got a
drugs
past,
or whatever
it is." Yeah.
It's just politics. I mean, I never. I didn't run my social life around the Commons. I didn't go to strangers' bar. I didn't hang out in the tea room when I didn't need to be there. I had a social life outside of Westminster, non-politico friends, not in the media. My closest friends are not in politics. And so there was always this kind of element of intrigue. And then there was the clothes I wear, for example. I was just kind of slightly taken aback by the amount of tension, in the suits I wear. Now, I was brought up, my father would have said, and this is a man who had to deal with a lot of prejudice when he arrived in this country, that, dress properly, dress smart. That's the first, before you open your mouth, people making judgments on you. So I like to dress smart, but I didn't realise there was going to be this whole kind of commentary about it.
And people would judge you the other way, as a bit of a spiv for wearing sharp suits.
Wow. They could judge whatever, but then the question is, do you not then wear the clothes you want to wear? And I just thought, no, I'm going to be myself. But that's the nature of this game. And I don't mean to sound like I'm playing a violin and moaning. I'm just explaining, how it is to do this job. But all of that said, it's such a tremendous privilege to do our job. But also, it comes with a huge burden, I think, and not burden. It comes with huge responsibilities. And if you, like myself and my friends and colleagues who resigned from the Labour Party, feel the system is broken, I don't think we have the liberty to go, oh, well, it's broken and we're not going to do anything about it. Because the difference between us and other people, and there are millions of people who feel that politics is failing them at the moment, is that as a member of parliament, you can actually do something about that. And so there is this sense that we need to do something.
Because you had, your choice, I suppose, was just to walk away. You could go off. You could walk away and get a nice corporate job somewhere, couldn't you?
I don't know. Who knows?
If you wanted to, but you've chosen not to do that, to start something new, wherever it may lead. I presume it's leading towards a new political party.
Yeah, I think we need something new. It could be a movement, it could be a new party. We've been very careful, deliberately so, partly because you can't build a new party and a new movement whilst you're in an existing one, to be clear that, that is the trajectory that we could see us being on. But we don't want to do this just with 7 MPs in Westminster committee rooms. This needs to be something that involves all those people who feel disenfranchised and that there's not a proper choice. And so, one of the immediate tasks we will need to do is to work out how we're going to have that consultation and do that, particularly given that, we don't have the big money of the established parties.
You don't. You don't have backers. Everyone assumes you've got some big rich businessmen behind you.
Do you know what? If any of them are watching, please do help us and give us some money so that we can build an infrastructure.
But you must have had conversations over the last few months with...
Yeah, but the thing
people
is,
with money who want you
people
to
with
do
money
something.
who want to see something happen. They want to see something happen, and
before they give you the money.
but they want to know that you're serious. But again, like the press conference yesterday, we funded ourselves. All this chat about these millions of, I'd love to see that.
Why is it a company, not a political party?
Because we're not a political party that's standing candidates, and we needed a vehicle through which we can take on people, establish a bank account and have people give to. So
because it means you don't have to be transparent, doesn't it?
No, but we're going to.
You're going to be.
We're going to be. We've been absolutely clear that we're going to be transparent, and we're actually going to adopt a higher standard than you would expect of a company, because we're going to be judged, although we're not a political party, according to those standards. So that's always.
So we'll know every penny where it's come from.
Which is it's absolutely the work we are going to comply. I think the intention. I'm not in charge of this side of things, but the intention is that we have the same apply the kind of same transparency standards as the parties. But what's been wonderful over the last 24 hours, the huge number of small donors who have given through our website, which is theindependent.group. Literally thousands.
As a launch, how do you feel it went? Because, your website went down for a bit.
It did, but we weren't expecting. Do you
Your
know,
launch
like,
was
at one
a bit
point,
sort of amateurish, and I almost wondered whether it was deliberate. Are you deliberately trying not to be too slick?
there's only so much. Well, look, there's only so much that you can prepare, and for these things. And look, we didn't.
Luciana Burgess stood up and said, "I'm the Labour MP for," and it's just like, "Oh no, I'm not anymore."
I know, but you can't. That was. You can script an event to an extent, but that was such an emotional thing, what we were doing yesterday. It was a unique, momentous thing. And so you can't do it all, it's never going to go perfectly.
What was going on with Angela Smith and Funny Tinge?
Look, Angela did the right thing in being very clear, very quickly, that what she said, it wasn't just like unfortunate, it was wrong. And
Why do you think it came out?
I watched the clip again. I didn't watch the whole programme. And you'll have to ask her why, but my reading was she was searching for the right words, but couldn't, totally got it wrong. And often, let's just be honest about this. Or if you or I talked about coloured people, for example, we probably would be received in a different way to somebody who was white for obvious reasons. Now, I talk about people of colour. But if these things you're not fluent, and you and I will talk about these issues, there aren't many newscasters who look like you, even now in 2019. And so she just got it completely wrong. But
is it subconscious bias, do you think?
No, I don't. I mean, look, in her actions and the way I've got to know Angela obviously very well over the last year, I do not detect any prejudice whatsoever. But she got the words absolutely wrong, and she admits that and acknowledges it caused offence. But the issue is compare and contrast that. If you say, look at the party that we've left, which had to be dragged kicking and screaming to acknowledge that it had made mistakes and that there was, people not just saying the wrong things but being prejudiced, and took months to acknowledge that. Angela, within, an hour or so, having seen the clip, was like, oh my God, what the hell am I saying? And immediately apologised and dealt with it. And so I don't really have much more to say than that, but it's not, look, it's not, I'm not going to beat around the bush. It's not just unfortunate or sympathetic, it's wrong. And she's clear about that.
Do you feel liberated at all?
Well, do I look liberated?
Well, I don't know. I'm trying to work it out because, I've interviewed you many times and it's always quite hard to get to the real Chuka Umunna, to be honest. You're very guarded and you're very careful and, you know what you want to say and you tend to sort of stick to saying it. And I just wonder whether you now feel different because you don't have to stick to a party line. You can just tell us what you believe.
I feel...
I could spend the next half an hour putting to you loads of things you've said in the past that you probably would struggle to repeat today. And I'm not going to do that. But I just,
I do feel
let your head out.
I do feel I can let. I think everyone knows what you mean, but there's a sense of liberation, and responsibility, because I think there are lots of people who identified with what we were saying, do believe we need an alternative, and now it's our job to try and build that in the right way. And who knows when we will have an election and what form any future entity will take. But I do feel a sense of responsibility to my community and the country generally. And, there are a lot of people who, already the kind of avalanche of emails and messages we've had, there are a lot of people placing some faith in us. And so we've now got to deliver the goods. But
you haven't really said what it is, you stand for, because it's only day 2 as we speak today. Well, so, it's very difficult to know what are people coming towards? Well, beyond a personality or two.
Well, I think there's obviously far more to it than that. My own view is that there is a progressive politics in this country which finds advocates and followers in both the centre-left, which has obviously been traditionally associated with Labour, the liberal tradition, Liberal Democrats, and the One Nation Conservative tradition. And I do believe there are a set of progressive values that drive those people. And ultimately it is one that seeks to give people individual freedom to make of this world what they can by giving them a platform and the tools to succeed. And that is, I think, fundamentally different, both from the conception of the, say, left and the right. The left is very statist. It is all about collective provision, not so much about individual responsibility, whereas the right is to leave the person to sink or swim in a free market. Whereas actually what you seek to do, I think, in the new middle ground in British politics is you're not necessarily prescriptive about whether you're going to have a left-right solution to a problem, but you've got these values and you will choose the policy prescription that will deliver on those values and help people to do it for themselves. And so now I've given you a few paragraphs there, but we are going to be making different interventions, offering up ideas on what our values are and what a prospectus could be. But if we went straight to that without actually having the conversation with people, we'd end up basically just doing what the traditional parties do, and we would like to be a bit different.
So do you think Jeremy Corbyn's Labour Party is too left-wing, economically? Do you think the nationalisation promises, the way they're going to redistribute, do you think it's too much?
I think that it is too locked into old ideology providing policy prescriptions, for example, like nationalisation, which were a solution to challenges in the past, but not necessarily the future. And I think one of the biggest challenges we have going forward into the future is how we develop this explosion of technology in a way that doesn't concentrate ownership in the hands of a few people, which is what these big tech giants can tend to do, in a way that ensures ownership is more diverse and that we don't have these technologies being used to impinge on people's civil rights, their privacy, and also to attack us as a country. So that is a big future problem. And nationalisation, not that I'm opposed to it, people forget, I was the one who led the opposition to the privatisation of Royal Mail, the last big one in Parliament. But I don't think being obsessed by some of these old solutions for a previous time is relevant to the future. And so
it's quite hard to follow all that, though. I mean, if you're a worker at Honda who's about to lose their job, why on earth should you be interested in what you lot are doing?
First of all, we're clear that we need to remain members of the European Union, which is the biggest market in the world. And although ultimately Brexit wasn't the only reason for what's happening at Honda, if you speak to any of the workers there, and I have seen the interviews with the representatives, they're absolutely clear that Brexit has been a massive contributing factor to the loss of their jobs.
I mean, Honda say it wasn't.
I know they say it wasn't, but that isn't what the workers say. That's the first thing. So there's a very clear difference there, and we're not messing around. We want the UK to remain a member of the European Union. That is ultimately where we would like to see things. Secondly, in terms of national security, one of the biggest differences between us and the leadership of the Labour Party is that we believe you need a strong defence, and we are not going to be parroting the narratives of states hostile to the UK in foreign and defence matters. So say, for example, the Skripal case. You would not for one moment have us deciding to buy a Russian government narrative on what happened there over our police and security services. And thirdly, as you said, around the economic side of things, we honestly do believe you've got to have an adult conversation with people and be honest about the tough challenges that we face. So take nationalisation, for example. To do the kinds of nationalisations that the Labour Party is talking about of water will cost tens of billions of pounds. And if you're going to do that, how are you going to actually pay for it? Now, they've talked about purchasing the shares in some of these countries at a value to be determined by the government, which is, in some senses threatens people's private property rights, but also a lot of our personal pension funds, pensioners are wrapped up in these companies. Now, to me, that just seems like a slightly, it sounds good, but how are you going to pay for it? And if you're not going to give market value for the assets that you're purchasing there, there's going to be losers in that, which are the British people. So I just offer those as three different examples. Am I going to spell out to you right now, Krishnan, a manifesto, as it were?
No, of course not.
No, but just to give you a flavour of where we're coming
and
from.
Socially, I mean, what are you? I mean, I know you're socially liberal, but say on crime.
Yes.
Are you tough on crime? Are you tough on sentencing? Do you want to let out prisoners under 12-month sentences from the prisons and say, stop doing that? Where are you on that kind of thing?
I think that tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime was appropriate for its time, which was the 1990s, but I don't think is the right starting point for a conversation now. And these issues are very much at the forefront of my mind because we have major issues around serious youth violence in my constituency. And there, yes, of course, you've got to be tough on crime, tough on the causes of crime. But the problem is that the social contract between society and young people has been broken. And, I think one of the key values of progressives is we believe in the idea of reciprocity. You treat others in the way that you would wish to be treated yourself. And you have duties and you have responsibilities to one another. And I think society has failed to meet its responsibilities and duties to young people in areas like mine. And therefore, when you're asking those young people to abide by the norms, the rules, and the laws that you would expect of other people, they are deciding that they do not have to work within those structures. And so you've got to rebuild the social contract. And so there are rights and responsibilities on both sides there. So I just think you've got to start the conversation in a different place. And that goes back to what I was saying. Addressing the challenges that we've got now and looking into the future, not just parroting a slogan from the past, which was the 1990s.
So what does that mean for sentencing, for example?
Well, I think you've got to have tough sentencing. I haven't, say, for example, in relation to the new knife crime orders that the Home Secretary is talking about introducing, I've been clear with him, look, if you can show me that that is going to act as a deterrent and reduce the likelihood of young people in my area carrying a knife, show me the evidence. I'll support that. But I'm not just going to knee-jerk oppose it because of the risk of it criminalising young people. Worried as I am about that, I am worried about that, and I want to see evidence that that's not simply what it's going to do. So but these are all my personal view. At the moment, we are not a party, we're an independent group of MPs. But I think it's really important that we have these conversations. People like you are challenging us on this because we need to really, distill what the problems are we have as a country and how we solve them, not in the kind of left-right way as we have before, but what's actually going to work.
On Brexit, I mean, you've made clear your frustrations with the Labour Party's positioning or slowness to embrace a second referendum.
Yes.
But what about your own position on things like immigration? I mean, you now say you want to remain in the European Union.
Yes.
That involves freedom of movement on immigration. Now, you've been through periods in the past where you've said freedom of movement had to end.
I've said freedom of movement as we know it, as it is, had to end. But free movement is changeable within the construct that is the European Union. I gave a whole long speech on this in October 2016, explaining what I meant. Now, of course, people on the hard left would be like, hi, one minute you think free movement's good, the next minute you think it's bad. No, if you actually bothered to read what I said and the detail on this, you'd understand. We can better manage migration from EU countries within the existing EU framework. So, for example, if you come to our country and you've been here for 3 months or more, you haven't got a job and there's no prospect of you having a job, we can do what they do in other countries like Belgium and actually require you to leave. But we don't do that. We could actually ensure that where there is population change in different communities, public funds better follow population change. We don't need to change any rules for that. We could do that. But above all...
So there is a middle ground on immigration, is what you're saying?
I absolutely think there is. And I think the problem on the left is the left likes to concentrate on the economic and not focus enough on the cultural. And there is definitely, in different local communities, I made a point of visiting Boston and Skegness in Lincolnshire, which scored the highest Leave vote. I represent an area with the highest Remain vote. And I didn't find a bunch of racists and people with bigoted views. There was a bit of that, but that wasn't overwhelmingly what I found. I found a lot of people of a particular generation who are worried about the changing nature of their community, and they felt that the immigration, particularly from Eastern Europe that there had been, threatened the English nature of what that town was. Now, you can deal with that if you actually better integrate newcomers when they come to our country. When my dad came here in the 1960s, he didn't want to come here to impose his Nigerian culture on Lambeth. He of course wanted to bring it with him, but he wanted to embrace what it was to be English. And so when he started off working in a kitchen, was one of his early jobs in, I think, the South African Mining Corporation in the city, and he was washing plates. He got the chef working in the kitchen to teach him how to make shepherd's pie, apple strudel, traditional English fare, because he wanted to learn that, and he wanted to integrate. I actually think if there's better integration of newcomers into our country, they don't need to be seen as a threat, but actually they enhance what it is to be British. They do not want to, in the main, threaten the English identity of a town. But if we're just going to have this laissez-faire attitude, where have newcomers come here, plonk them in a community, we don't first of all ensure that they have a decent level of English so they can properly integrate. We don't teach them anything about the norms and traditions of that political community, of that particular community. Of course, we're going to have these problems. So I absolutely think there is a middle ground here.
I mean, it's interesting you raise your dad again. I mean, a lot of us exist and work with our parents' achievements in the back of our heads. We're often doing it partly to sort of impress our parents or compare ourselves to our parents. To what extent does that weigh on you? You know, you lost your dad at 13. Do you operate thinking what your dad would think? What your dad would be proud of, all that kind of stuff?
I think we all think about what our parents would think. And maybe it's because I lost him at such a young age that it maybe weighs on me. I don't know. It's a good question.
What's the answer?
I don't do what I do in life in order to live up to my father's story. I mean, he had a particular story. My life is...
He made a leap.
My life is different. He made a leap. But you draw on these things. You get inspiration. I get inspiration from my father. I get inspiration from my mother, who, found herself without any income and no earner in the family, and having been a probation officer, stopped doing that to look after my sister and I when we were young, retrained as a solicitor at the age of 46 and now as a partner in a law firm. So you get, loads of inspiration from your family. And of course there was, my grandfather. And I always remember actually the Liberal Democrats in the general election of 2010 tried to do this whole thing that, he's a son of an entrepreneur and the grandson of a high court judge. And I was like, you think I'm ashamed of that? My dad arrived here with nothing and worked his way up to be really successful. And, my grandfather, fought for this country during the Second, World War in the intelligence services and, prosecuted the Nazis at Nuremberg before he became a judge. You think I'm ashamed of these people?
If you're going to carry on with this, don't you need democratic legitimacy? Don't you need to put yourself up for election again?
I have a contract with the people of my constituency, which I haven't broken. The Labour Party broke it. As I said, my constituency...
You stood on the manifesto, didn't you?
No, but I was clear that there were some key differences. Look, I came on your programme and voiced them. I made no secret of the fact that I had fundamental differences of opinion with the Labour leadership. I'd voted no confidence. I didn't vote for the Labour leader before he was elected, and I continued making the arguments that I'd always made on things like national security after he was elected.
You credited Corbyn yourself for some of the increase in your majority.
I said, well, I ultimately have put down the increase in my majority, and if you compare the increase in the majority in my seat and the one next door in Vauxhall, the Vauxhall bounce was, 3.5%. The Streatham bounce was 15%, slightly over 15%. And I absolutely put that down to my Brexit position. But no, I don't want to be, what's the word? I can't find the right word, but the point is I don't want to take away from Labour had a good campaign. It had a much better campaign. And actually, partly because it was a repeat of many of the things that were in the manifesto in 2015.
So why not put yourself up again?
Because I have a contract with the people and I will serve out this term. I haven't changed. Under the terms of our constitution, one of our key values, by the way, is believing in parliamentary democracy. I think a lot of people in the Labour Party quite like to usurp it, but under our parliamentary democracy, you are elected as an individual first and foremost. And I was very clear about the differences that I had with the Labour Party before my election. I haven't changed. The Labour Party did. So I don't feel the need for that. And I also think, right now, people want us to focus on Brexit. And part of the reason, actually, for leaving is so that I can actually focus on what I really want to say on Brexit and not worry about this need to somehow persuade the Labour leadership, because I'm not going to be able to do that.
Do you believe Jeremy Corbyn will pivot to backing a second referendum?
I don't know. I mean, look, he's a Brexiter. He's been a Eurosceptic for many decades. I think he's essentially pretending to have a position. I think in his view, I haven't, very, very briefly.
He's voted Remain when you say he's a Brexiter.
Yes, but let's see. I mean, you have to take him at his word. But I think he'd be quite happy to see us leave the European Union and hope that the Tories will carry the blame for any fallout. I think the problem is because Labour has been so weak, it hasn't had a coherent and strong position on Brexit. It's been incoherent. It will be seen as facilitating this Brexit and not doing nearly enough to chart a different course.
If this thing you're part of becomes a party, do you want to lead it?
I want to play the biggest role possible.
That's the leader then,
well,
isn't
look,
it? The biggest role possible.
I think, if we go straight into hierarchy and all the old soap opera of the other parties, then again, we just end up becoming like them. And one of the things we've tried to concentrate on, we don't want to be too precious about this, too mealy-mouthed, too, kind of white with perfect, but we do
want to change the world. You need power. So you need
power. You do need a leadership team. But you also, if you don't want to replicate the problems of the existing structures, have a different culture. And so, I want to play the biggest role possible. I don't rule out doing anything. I'm not necessarily ruling in doing anything. But we've got to try and create something different here. So, I mean, I'm answering it my way, perhaps not your way. Sorry.
And you want Conservatives to be part of this, don't you, as well?
I think, as I said, I think there's a progressive politics in this country. that straddles the three kind of political traditions people recognise, and we all have more in common than we do with the people in the two main parties. That's clear.
Given what you said you heard from Labour colleagues when you were running for the leadership, do you think Britain today would be ready for a black leader?
Well, one of the most popular political leaders in this country is Sadiq Khan. And he's not just popular in London.
That's like a different country.
Well, as I was going to say, it's not just in London, but actually he is popular around the country as well. So I would hope, given that he has the biggest single mandate of any politician in this country, that that's indicative that this country is ready for diversity.
But do you see racism on the rise at the moment?
It's hard to tell. Based on the figures, you could extrapolate from that racism is on the rise. You look at anti-Semitism, for example. However, during and since the referendum campaign, when I sat in the Home Affairs Select Committee, I think what we saw was not necessarily that there was a general increase in racism and hate crime, although there was immediately after the referendum, but people who were racist anyway felt licensed to vocalize that and be more open about it. And so I think it's hard to tell. I really hope that we've moved on from, the 80s, 70s and 60s. But if we're complacent, my fear is that we go back to that. We've got massive challenges in this era of globalization, climate change, technological change. How on earth do we continue to ensure that lower and middle income families, see rising prosperity? But the danger is when you have these challenges and societies under stress, that the hate mongers come into that space, both on the left and the right, and they try and set up different groups against each other and ask the question of who is to blame, the kind of Donald Trump form of politics, whereas actually the real question is how can we work together to make the new world work for more people? And that's the essence of my politics.
Right, let's assume you win. You've got a movement, you've got a party, you're Prime Minister. Do you have some big radical things you want to do in the first week? This is not asking you for a manifesto. I'm just saying you can change the world. You can change the world tomorrow. What's it going to be? What do you want to do?
I know this sounds so motherhood and apple pie, but one of the things that I don't think has changed enough during my lifetime is the fact that ultimately the circumstances of your birth still dictate so much of the rest of your life in this country. And if through governing, you can actually create a society where the circumstances of your birth don't dictate your future. And if you work hard, you put in the graft, you put in the effort, you can actually succeed. That's the kind of society that I would like to see. In my worldview is not one that divides people into the oppressed and oppressors, into, people who've got more virtue by dint of being a particular class or particular background. I just think ultimately we're all human beings and we've all got potential. We need to make sure it's realized. And I think the problem is with our existing parties is either they don't recognize that we don't all start in the same place, or if they do, they want to control everything with a strong arm of the state. Whereas we want to free people to be able to actually enjoy the benefits globalization can bring. But I'm planning to bring out a publication on this and give a speech on this, because I think, we need to have this conversation and hopefully anchored in, things that address the problems of the here and now and not necessarily a kind of the old tunes from the past.
How confident are you, scale of 1 to 10, that this is going to work?
I think half of this will be how good we are and the prospectus we can put forward to the British people. And when I say we, whatever form this new alternative takes. But there's no denying it that events are going to be a massive determinant of whether people are ready for something different. And if you look at, other political projects, progressive political projects that have succeeded, most of the names, you've mentioned some of them, have succeeded completely against the odds. And while these are incredibly talented people, being in the right place and the right time in events is a big determinant of it too. So I am confident, but I also feel ultimately if we present the British people with an alternative and they don't want it, well, so be it. But as long as I'm still having the privilege of doing this job, I think they deserve to see a better alternative to what they've got at the moment, and I want to play my part in putting that forward.
Chuka Umunna, thank you very much indeed.